Yeah, well, you were right on time. My German heart is delighted. Okay, next one up, we have Karl. Karl, I met at the same longevity workshop that I met Sonia at for the first time. And since then, I think that it was already around back then, Karl has really worked tirelessly on putting together a spreadsheet that turned into a fantastic website of really logging progress of different longevity biotech companies and basically just coordinating the field a bit. So it's been like quite the great public service that you've produced there for the longevity field. And thank you so much for doing so. Thank you for continuing to add to it, because now that the field is finally growing, it's probably going to be a lot more work than it used to be, which I guess is a good problem to have. So Karl, please take it away and explain to us a little bit where you think the field is going.
Thank you, Allison. All right, so I'm going to leave this up for like 10, 20 seconds. If you want to go to that tiny URL, you can get the slides while I'm talking and flip back and forth, or just QR code. Basically, I'm going to talk about the last couple years of progress, the current state of the overall biotech field of aging and longevity, and prospects for the near-term future. Capsule history of the field. The thing everybody in the field knows that's so important is the core assumption of the field, Geroscience hypothesis, is that pathologies, molecular pathologies that happen as a result of aging, slowly starting in midlife, underlie all the chronic diseases of aging, and it makes a lot more sense to target those therapeutically and get multiple bangs for the buck than it does to treat each disease as an independent silo and only treat diseases once they become full-blown diseases. This sort of sick care model nonetheless still dominates all of clinical medicine and healthcare as it has for 100 plus years. So capsule history of the field, the last 50 years, the last half century roughly, the scientists, the basic scientists at the Buck and other places have figured out that aging's malleable. It's not this atomic clock that ticks invariably. We can actually interfere with it. So in the past, in the 2010s, roughly, a biotech corner of the biotech industry was born to productionize this. So if you look at the number of companies that are fundamentally targeting aging, the number of aging or longevity biotech companies founded each decade, you get a trickle, and then this is the 2010s. So this is something really happened in the 2010s where that industry really started. And in 2019, I started the website agingbiotech.info to track the commercialization progress of that field. A theme that we've heard from almost every speaker here so far is the lack of money in the field. And so going back one step, the fundamental reason for the lack of money, and not just money, the lack of resources, including the number of people working in the field, is really that this geroscience hypothesis view of the field of trying to be preventative and attack the things that are underlying all the chronic diseases instead of the sort of sick care reactive model is something that everybody in the field knows, but the majority of the public does not. So 99% of the overall public does not understand that, and even 90+% of the healthcare world and the professional medical world doesn't understand that. So we're going to talk about how to flip that. But first, let's look at what's actually been going on with all the companies in the field. So that was 5 years ago that I started this. So now we have 5 years worth of data of what's going on in the aging biotech subsector. It's all good. It's all up and to the right. It's not up and to the right fast enough, which we'll talk about again, but it is up and to the right. So number of companies in the space was 100, 120 when I started this. Now it's over 400. Total amount of employees working for all those companies was a little over 2,000. Now it's almost 6,000. And total amount of money raised, these are millions, so this was less than 5 billion 5 years ago, and now it's nearing 20 billion. And if you look at a subset of these companies, but the most important subset are actually getting new pharmaceuticals through clinical trials so that millions of people can use them, and they're more powerful than supplements. And if you look at the total number of clinical trials of all these companies, it is also up and to the right. Another way to track, the most important probably other way to track things is the clinical trial phase progress. So clinical trials proceed from 1, 2, and 3. And if you look at just the companies that were around when I started this, you've had some failures, some trials that failed, some companies that failed. Those are the down right arrows. But more have progressed, and some of them have progressed multiple stages, like phase 1 to phase 3, or preclinical to phase 2 or 3. So overall, it's moving forward. It's like everything, startups fail, but overall, it's sort of moving forward. So okay, this is the money slide. So this is sort of the current status. If you look at all the companies, some of them were working on pathways that then aging scientists figured out, but they were already at it. So there are a couple companies that are actually in late stage already. So there's 20 companies who are already in at least one phase 3 clinical trial, and almost 30 more that are in phase 2. A few more in phase 1, and I'm lumping the 2As here because that's sort of like phase 1. And then there's a large number in preclinical, over 100. And at least 60 of those are not just starting, but even though they haven't gotten to phase 1 yet, they've raised a serious funding round. They're in sort of late stage preclinical. So I'm going to skip ahead for a minute and come back to that slide in a minute. So why don't more people in the public understand this so that we can actually change the way the NIH works? A4LI does great work, Sonia mentioned, but really the politicians have to kind of follow what the public understands and wants. The public doesn't get it yet because they haven't had that thing that really flips the narrative. So the big question in the field, the $1 million, $1 billion question is, what's going to flip the narrative? Everyone has their favorite approach, and it might be a combination of all these. We don't know. Is it going to be, solving aging in dogs, getting dogs to live a lot longer? Half the public has dogs, so maybe that will do it. Maybe the X Prize will help. Maybe it will be the social movements like Vitalism. Maybe it'll be the big petitions like the longevity, Dublin Longevity Declaration. Maybe it'll be the GLP-1 drugs and the TAME-like benefits they show for a large variety of different things. But one possibility is by treating a fundamental aspect of aging, the Geroscience hypothesis suggests that if something gets through clinical trials and gets on the market, it's going to be able to label expand. It will affect multiple age-related diseases, and therefore doctors can prescribe it off-label. And unlike most drugs that get on the market to get through phase 3 clinical trials, there's a good possibility that it can actually get approved for multiple different age-related diseases or indications. So here are the success rates for different stages of clinical trials. Actually, once you get into phase 3, you have more than a 50% chance of getting to approval. So we have over 20 companies already in phase 3 with at least one trial. So that means that within a few years, phase 3s only take 1 to 4 years. Within 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 at the most, we're going to have 10 to a dozen approved new drugs that are on patent. So if you work backwards, it's over 10 that are likely to get approved soon. So that's it. That's basically it. I will just say that I did look at all the phase 3 clinical trials, and most of them there's more than 20 because some of the companies have more than one. And there's a new table that you can find on agingbiotech.info/trials top row that goes into the details on those.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
How many of those trials do you think actually will affect multiple things, though? Because there is a phenomenon where a lot of these companies pivot to just being standard disease companies because they're effectively forced.
Right. So in order to check this, I by hand went through all 20 companies' trials for all their phase 3s, and I made a manual binary judgment. Is this likely to affect multiple age-related diseases or not? And in all cases except for one of the 20, they really are. Things like stem cells, mitochondria, membrane stabilization, FGF21. It's very clear that these could potentially label expand or get prescribed off-label.
Hello. Actually, kind of similar to that question. Which of these companies excite you the most?
I think that the stem cell stuff. This is a good part where I should make a comment on Jose's talk. Some of you may have seen the recent news that BioAge's phase 2 muscle atrophy drug just got terminated because of tox issues. This is the market that Immunis is playing in. Immunis is using a stem cell secretome. I actually think these stem cell, I think there's a lot of stem cell trials, and these are just, turns out there's a whole bunch, 8 plus at least. I think that there's a lot of power in the stem cell approach. So that general high level approach I think is high. And then the mitochondria stuff. I think it's very clear that mitochondria are super important in multiple age-related pathologies. There's a bunch of different interesting mitochondrial stuff out there. Some of this first stuff is cardiolipin stabilization, but improving the mitochondrial membrane is super important. I'm not a big fan of slow aging approaches, things like rapamycin and FGF21, but for the purpose of flipping the narrative and making the majority of the public understand the field, which will then trigger an influx of funding and resources to the field, change the NIH budget ratios, I think that those things are, whether the GLP-1 or FGF21 or rapamycin, but the stuff that's on patent will have bigger effects. So I think I'm very pro those things for their potential to change the narrative for the wider public.
All right. Thank you so much, Karl.